And so I wanted to give dispatch. I've been doing these every day, giving my take on the events that are basically taking place around me. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to do a few things. I visited People Summit, so I had the opportunity to interview. Those interviews are on screen. And basically, the People's Summit is like a protest of this summit. It's almost like a repudiation of the world leaders and everything else, and basically the things that they're saying here. And I feel, I gotta be honest, more comfortable at the People's Summit than I do here, even though it is fascinating to basically be here. All things being equal, I want to talk about what took place yesterday, and I want to get some thoughts around that. So, I get the opportunity to go and see Biden, Kamala Harris. Oh, right. Kamala Harris is okay. She's alive. She's well. She gave an intro speech of what was basically taking place. And then Biden comes on, he gives his speech. Now, what is interesting is that in Biden's speech, this event is weird. So, one of the things that they did was have this kind of power performance where the group was doing this thing called One World. And the group and the performance was exceptional, extremely good. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to them. There's like a one world, one world. They have the picture of the globe in the background. And I'm thinking, my Star Trek aspect of myself kicks in. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. This idea that the world comes together and everything else. And then immediately I thought, well, wait a minute. They don't even have all of the Americas coming together for this event. How are we doing one world? And you get Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela being excluded. As such, many of the other countries basically said, we're not coming either, or we're going to send a lesser delegation. So you get I'm sorry. You get Guatemala, let's see, where are they? Guatemala, Mexico being one of the big ones that basically said they're not showing up. Obrador. You get, I wrote these things down. But, El Salvador. Where is it? I just wrote these things down. But basically, you get several countries that decide not to show up. But the big one being, of course, Mexico. And the reason is pretty Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and Bolivia decide not to show up. Now that's big, right? And the reason they decide to show up is pretty straightforward. They basically say, how are you excluding countries that are part of the Americas from the Summit of Americas? More importantly, the Summit of Americas is supposed to be all of these countries coming together for economic development, partnership, communication, etc. Great. What does that have to do with the governments of those countries? And even if you disagree with the government of those countries, so what? You got feelings about it? You got feelings about it. There are multiple reasons why you should have invited those countries. Ultimately, though, the Summit of Americas, if they're indeed, each country is supposed to have a voice, each country is supposed to come together with this notion of making their pitch about the things that they need, and you find some kind of win-win relationships, then you invite those countries. They're one of many. The notion that one country is going to unilaterally make the decision on who comes and who doesn't come kind of defeats the purpose of having all of these countries come together in this kind of unison of voices. There's that. There's a secondary part where it just looks weak. Ultimately, your summit, whatever objectives and priorities you're basically going along with, has been sidelined for the conversation about America's looks weak because America can't get the other countries on board. So your objective was, I want to ostracize these countries. Okay. And after I ostracize these countries, I'm now going to try to get all of the other countries to join me in ostracizing those countries. Okay. Do you have the political clout to do that? And if you don't, what does it mean? Meaning you've taken an action that your position could not support. And in not supporting it, you hit your head on the brick of reality where the rest of the world looks at that and says, America doesn't have the soft power necessary in order to get those countries on board because America didn't have the soft power necessary to get those countries on board. In their heads, we're going to be able to ostracize a country. All of us are going to be able to come together and show a show of unity and show those are countries that we don't particularly like. But it didn't happen that way. Instead, what happened was many of the other countries said, we're not going to participate if you are going to do that. You should not ostracize the other countries. And understand, whether they state this in the media clearly or not, it needs to be understood. A, there's a hypocrisy associated with it. But B, there's a historical context. Think back. When asked about why didn't you invite those countries, they said, well, they're authoritarian regimes. Okay, so you don't like authoritarian regimes. No, we don't like authoritarian regimes. And then your mind immediately goes to, well, what about all the coups that took place where you guys were knocking over countries and putting in dictatorships? I mean, for God's sake, the list is astonishing. 1964 Brazil, 1973 Chile, 1976 Argentina, 1971 Bolivia. You can go to Guatemala, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay. You were knocking over governments and putting in military juntas. And by the way, even recently, with the OAS getting rid of Evo Morales, and with the Honduran president being taken out of his pajamas by the military, where they're like, oh, that's not a coup. I don't know what that is. When the military takes the president out in his pajamas, backed by Hillary Clinton as the State Department at the time during Obama's tenure. These are coups. These are coups. These are not instances of security in a particular region. In fact, after those coups, those governments and the public went to pot. And so it's like this notion of, oh, we don't like dictatorships, while we promoted, supported, and basically assisted in killing, assassinating, and deposing various leaders of those other countries, but we don't like dictatorships. So we're going to ostracize those countries. What each of those countries, whether it's Mexico, whether it's, I forget the other ones, Mexico, El Salvador, Honduras, and Bolivia, what those countries knows is that it could be them. There but go the grace of God, go I. That's what they know. Meaning that in the same way that the U.S. decides, I want to ostracize these countries, I don't want you guys to be with me, those countries, especially if they have left-wing governments, could perfectly end up at the blunt edge of the same ostracizing that the U.S. is trying to do with them. They also know that those are countries, especially left-wing governments, that have been already destroyed and overthrown by the U.S. in the past, and in no way want to add into what they're trying to do to the other governments, be it Cuba, Venezuela, or for that matter, Nicaragua. Not to mention the hypocrisy of Haiti being there, where they basically assassinated the president, Moise, with the new guy being, at the very least, looked at as being a culprit. We don't like democracies. Joe Biden is going to be on his knees going to Saudi Arabia, ready to blow MBS in order to get gas and oil because he provoked a conflict in Ukraine that created all sorts of energy issues and spiked the cost of energy. But we don't like dictatorships. What about Israel? Fascist regime that it is. You have a situation where they murder a journalist, and decides we're not going to investigate. What about that? We're friends with them. We love them. We're okay with that. What about that? But you're telling me that in this situation, these three countries need to be ostracized. Anytime they're asked about that, they keep bringing that up. The media, CNN, asks Blinken directly about that, about the whole, hey, but we're friends with Israel, we're friends with MBS and Saudi Arabia. I mean, this looks kind of schizophrenic that you're willing to do this. Well, Blinken's response, long, dodged. Because the hypocrisy is that extreme where they cannot come up with a sufficient answer to explain why you're ostracizing these countries while simultaneously being perfectly fine with other governments that are authoritarian governments and will murder press without an investigation in the other. This seems to be a contradiction in terms. On top of that, I'm sitting in events yesterday and I'm hearing these guys talk about one world, economic development, hearing them talk about all the things, the successes, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, look, these are numbers. That's a number issue, right? If you're basically saying the organization coming together back during Bill Clinton, okay, fair enough, and we're doing economic development, integration, and all that stuff, again, fair enough. Those things can be measured. They can be measured. That's not an issue of propaganda. If you're saying that you're decreasing, increasing economic output, that's something measurable. If you're saying that you're able to, greater security, okay, that could be measurable. What do those things mean, as opposed to just kind of throwing that stuff out there? There's that part. The other part is, if you are telling me about economic development, security, you're coming up with new ideas for migration. One of the speeches that Biden gave, he made the point about immigration, and he basically said we're going to defend our borders, but he said that in the context of some kind of security arrangement that these guys are coming up with for the South. And when he said that, I remember writing it down, thinking to myself, okay, well, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means. But he's basically saying that they're coming up with some kind of new architecture for migration, where they're going to make it smooth, some kind of official thing, device that they're going to be using to do that. And yeah, right here. So he makes the point. Right, where is it? Where is it? Okay, right here. So he says they're going to tackle climate change. He makes a point of mutual commitment for site migration through the region. And he says safe and orderly migration. We will enforce our borders. Now, when he said that, I wrote down, well, what does that mean? Meaning, what does it mean for safe and orderly migration? What architecture are you trying to create with these countries and basically do that? And oftentimes this stuff is coded language, right? What matters is the practical matter reality of what it looks like, not necessarily the way they cast it. You can have a situation where Republicans and Democrats talk about the exact same thing, mean exactly the opposite things, and yet they use the same language in order to describe it. Language is tricky that way. What does it mean in practice is the only thing that matters. And at this point, I haven't seen it. Maybe they will come out with it later. The thing is, when they are making these statements about, a one world and we can build a better world, yeah, it's emotional, it's heart tugging. But at the end of the day, is that what's taking place? We're in California. California has hundreds of thousands of homeless people. If you're the president of the United States that just gave $50 billion to Ukraine, right there is a lack of priorities on top of it, right? When I talk to the people here in California, they often talk about the homelessness thing, even though they say the government is not doing anything about it. They're not touching it. They're not necessarily engaging it. Fair enough. The president of the United States gets on stage and talks about economic development and saying how we're integrating that stuff and we're having economic progress and people should get jobs. And I'm like, yeah, people should get jobs. What about here? Meaning, how are you making the speech to world leaders that are in these other countries talking about economic development and everything else? And you're in California where you cannot walk outside without stepping over a homeless person in order to get to wherever you're going, where they're going to be 2 or 3 in a way of you doing it. Outside my hotel, very nice hotel. As soon as you walk out, homeless person. Take a few steps, homeless person. Go around the block, homeless person. Go around the block, person digging in the trash can looking for food. Literally digging in and then drinking whatever was there in the trash can. And yet, the president of the United States is standing there talking about economic development for the region. Does that include the United States? And if so, why doesn't it look like it includes the United States? Meaning, how are you in California, of all places, that is the epicenter of homelessness in the United States, your argument is talking about economic development? It just seems like you're tone deaf and missing the boat. Also, if you are here and you're hearing the president say stuff like that, and you see the president get $50 billion to Ukraine, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? Like, the credibility gap is astonishing. It's a lack of priorities. And it's a stunning lack of priorities that comes out in every conversation that I've had with everybody here. I mean, that doesn't get to the shambolic way that it's being organized. Like I said, the people here are profoundly nice, exceptional. And everybody that you talk to is very kind. People from the State Department have been very nice and have been very pleasant. And they have been very helpful in trying to explain how things are. Yes, it's rather shambolic. No, they don't have details in regards to where things are. And there's that. People, great. Context is off. Context is off. You can't have that speech. You can't have that conversation. You can't have that particular framing of things, especially when you're in California. And again, part of that is the context as opposed to what is being said. It's like for example, OAS. If you are having an argument or if you're making a conversation saying we are for greater security of the democracies in the region, okay. And we are going to create devices and to ensure those democracies are protected. Again, they made that argument. Okay, what is that device and what does that mean? And is that device that you're talking about basically the OAS and strengthening that? And my first thought is, well, Bolivia was a democracy. You had no issue destroying that democracy and getting rid of Evo Morales when the guy won the election by 10 points. And that organization was responsible for kicking off the process of a violent fascist takeover of the country for about a year. And then after the takeover was over, where CIS takes power, you're looking at them saying you don't want them to prosecute the fascist coup leaders that were part of it, that were killing and injuring the indigenous community. Now, this is why an indigenous woman sits there basically saying indigenous people need to be more integrated into the societies. Again, agreed. But Evo Morales was the person that did that. The fascist government that came in after did not want that. And yet, you're also saying that the OAS is a great tool to ensure elections. Are you insane? How do you do that? How do you do that? How do you do that with a straight face? Like, even with the Honduras stuff, you have Orlando talking about, I'm trying to get, cocaine into the nose of every gringo. And we helped put that guy in because we didn't like the dirtbag lefty that was there. That was the one that Hillary Clinton basically escorted out, talking about the security escort out in their pajamas. All right. Now he is being implicated in drug crimes as a narco government where the U.S. is trying to get him extradited so he can be prosecuted. President of Honduras, the guy that we helped get in office. Is that security for Honduras? Knocking over that government? What about Bolivia? Was that security for the people there? Knocking over that government? And the fact that it was the tool, OAS, that helped do that is a little startling when they make the argument that that's what they believe in. That's kind of what I mean. The context is off. What they're saying is undermined by the context of events that are basically surrounding it. And again, the same thing applies to, this is the Summit for the Americas, when you have many of the people from the various Americas not showing up at the summit because they didn't like the fact that the U.S. was ostracizing certain countries, and in which case they said, we're not going to be a part of that, especially knowing since they themselves can be on the blunt end of that ostracizing. It's very weird. It's very weird. Especially if you're not like mainstream media where anything people say you just lump onto. It's very, very strange. The people here that I've talked to were shocked that, oh my God, we have a level of homelessness here that is breathtaking. We have areas where they're just, as far as you can see, homeless. And you're giving $50 billion to keep a coup government in office. How are you doing that? How are you doing that? And when you're having speeches here where you bring up Ukraine every so often, or you're talking about economic development, or you're talking about all these things that you guys are doing together and everything else. What are the homeless people here? Think about that. What about the people here who have to deal with the homeless issue? Meaning like hotels and reservations and everything else where people would say they love the hotel, but they hate the homeless, in which case they would bring that up as an issue for criticism. How do you do that? How do you do that? And yet, that's the event. And it's taking place in the homeless capital of America. And yet, we're talking about economic development and all that good stuff. It's weird, it's bizarre, and yet, Summit of Americas. So, I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say thank you to the people who donated on this one. And again, I'll keep giving updates. I'm leaving tomorrow, so we'll see how the update goes tomorrow. I'll probably do one when I get home. But I've been trying to keep track of the things that have been going on and the things that jumped out at me. They're talking about creating new devices between the various states. Now, again, it's hard to know what this exactly means, since what they mean by device may not necessarily be the context of the character of what they're saying. But look, I got it. So I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. I'll see you guys in a few.